They held a dinner to thank me, without asking what I liked. My daughter-in-law raised a glass and said, "I learned sacrifice from my mother-in-law, though she never really had a voice." Everyone laughed. I smiled too. But something inside me turned completely still. If you've ever swallowed your words, or forgotten what you once dreamed of, then come sit with me. Let's share a cup of tea and a memory that lingers like warm light on an old wooden floor. I used to be the one who always knew where the scissors were, who ironed the collars just so, who remembered everyone's medicine and favorite tea. Some called it devotion. Others said I was irreplaceable, but somewhere along the way, I disappeared from my own story. And this is how I started to find myself again. Not loudly, but in silence. The house is never truly silent, but it hums in a way that leaves space between things. The clock ticks softly in the kitchen. A car passes outside. The heater breathes. I sit by the table each morning with my tea. Same blue mug, same chipped handle. I like that chip. Something imperfect that doesn't ask to be replaced. From the window, I can see the hydrangeas. They're tired now, leaning a little. Like me. Still rooted, still here. This morning, my son left early for work. He didn't say much, just kissed the top of my head as he passed. I smiled. He didn't see it. The kids were late again, rushing around, calling out for things they couldn't find. I handed my grandson his backpack. He didn't notice. My daughter-in-law gave me a tired thank you over her shoulder before they all rushed out the door. The door clicked shut. Then, stillness. That's when the silence changes. It's not the peaceful kind. It's the kind that asks, "Do they know you're here?" I begin wiping the counters, though they're already clean. Habit. My hands still know what to do, even when no one is watching. I walk past the hallway mirror and catch a glimpse of myself. Hair pulled back, sweater buttoned to the neck. I've worn this same gray cardigan for years. It's comfortable, unassuming, like me. In the corner of the wardrobe still hangs that old office sweater, maroon with brass buttons. I bought it decades ago when I thought I might go back to work, but there was always someone who needed me more than I needed that job. So it stayed there, untouched, a silent relic of a life that never unfolded. They all say, we don't know what we'd do without you, but no one ever asks what I'd do with myself. Maybe they think I'm content. Maybe I thought so too. But lately, I've begun to feel the air differently. There's a weight in the stillness. And I wonder, if one morning I just didn't make the tea, would anyone notice? I rinse the mug. The warm water runs over my hands like memory. As I place it gently on the drying rack, I realize something. Today is my wedding anniversary. No one remembered, not even me, until just now. And I don't know what aches more, that it was forgotten, or that I almost forgot it myself. The light shifts on the floorboards. The morning moves on. And I carry this silence into the next breath, as if it were part of me. I wanted to be a literature teacher. It's strange how quietly that sentence still lives inside me. I haven't said it out loud in years, maybe decades. But it's there, like an old melody you hum under your breath when no one's listening. I loved words, loved the way stories could hold people together, or break them apart. I dreamed of standing in a modest classroom with chalk dust on my sleeves, reading poems to teenagers who didn't know yet how deeply life could bruise you. But my mother fell ill the year I turned 17. I left school that winter, just until she got better, I said. She never did. That spring, I learned how to change bandages, how to boil bitter herbs, how to hold back tears when someone you love begins to forget your name. By the time she passed, I was 21. By then, it felt too late to return to school. The world had moved on, and so had I, into marriage, into motherhood, into a life where someone always needed something before I could finish a thought of my own. I remember buying the maroon office sweater when I turned 30. It was on sale, but I still hesitated. Not because of the price, but because something in me whispered, "What if you never get to wear it?" I silenced that voice, folded the sweater carefully, and tucked it away. I was planning to apply for a part-time job at the local library. But that same month, My youngest developed asthma, and once again I stayed home. Over the years, that sweater became a strange kind of bookmark in my closet, marking a page I never got back to. It still hangs there. Brass buttons, soft wool, never worn, always waiting. There were other things, too. Hair appointments canceled because someone needed to be driven to school, books left unfinished because dinner had to be made. Small invitations to be a person in my own right declined because someone else's life was louder than mine. And yet, no one forced me. That's the thing. I said yes every time. I chose them, and they never asked me to stop choosing. I suppose I believed, in some quiet corner of my heart, that one day the time would circle back to me, that I could pause and pick up where I left off. But now I see things more clearly. I didn't pause. I disappeared. And the life I meant to live kept moving further away. Like a train you waved at without ever boarding. The sweater is still there. It still fits. But I'm no longer sure the woman it was meant for exists. I used to tell myself, you'll go back someday. But maybe, just maybe, I never learned how. It was just a family gathering, a birthday, I think, or maybe an anniversary for someone else. The kind of occasion where we cook too much food, pour too much tea, and sit around a long table pretending time hasn't shifted the weight between us. I woke up early that morning, as always, the house still dark, quiet. I peeled vegetables in silence, boiled the broth, cleaned the good china, checked the icebox twice. Everything had to be just right. Not because anyone would notice if it wasn't, but because I would. By mid-morning, the kitchen smelled like memories, lemongrass, ginger, soy sauce on slow heat. Food is a language I've always spoken fluently. It says, I see you, even when the words aren't said aloud. They arrived late, as usual. My son and his wife, the children tumbling in like wind. My daughter-in-law was wearing something bright, yellow. She looked tired, but elegant. Always does. Everyone gathered. Laughter, wine glasses clinking, the cousins were loud, the toddlers louder. I stood at the edge of it all, refilling bowls, wiping spills, straightening the chopsticks when no one was looking. Then, the toast. She stood, glass in hand, voice clear and practiced. I just want to say how thankful I am for the women who raised us, especially my mother. And my mother-in-law, of course. The most generous, patient woman I know. I mean, without Aunt Mai, we couldn't have done this. Pause. Aunt Mai. She said it without flinching, called me by her own mother's name. There was a moment of stillness, then someone laughed lightly, trying to soften it. Oh, she means you, Mom. My son chuckled and nudged her arm. Oh, God, sorry, she said, laughing too. I've just been talking to my mom so much this week. I got mixed up. Everyone laughed. I smiled, but something inside me fell a little colder. It wasn't the mistake itself. I've made worse. God knows I've called my own children by the dog's name once or twice. No, it was the ease of it, the way it didn't matter, the way no one really noticed what it meant for me, that I had become interchangeable, forgettable, a stand-in for someone else's mother, not seen fully, just assumed present, like a lamp in the corner of the room. You only notice when it's gone. We ate, we smiled. I served dessert and took photos and held the baby when he started to cry. And then, quietly, we went home. Back in my room, I hung up my jacket, fingers trembling slightly at the sleeves. The air was cool. I opened the closet, not looking for anything in particular, and there it was. The maroon office sweater. Still hanging, still waiting, just like me. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting on the soft wool, wondering when exactly I had become someone it was so easy to mistake. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, but not in the comforting way. It was the kind of silence that made the walls feel farther apart, as if the rooms had forgotten I was ever inside them. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The ticking clock, usually a companion, sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else's life. My husband snored gently beside me, unaware of the ache swelling in the space between us. He hadn't noticed the name mistake. Or if he did, he hadn't thought to ask how I felt. No one had. They never do, really. They tell me things after decisions have already been made, like when they changed the sofa without asking, or when they booked the kids' school schedule and simply assumed I'd adjust mine. I've become the afterthought, the one who nods and adjusts and makes it all seamless. They don't mean to leave me out, they just forget I was ever in. I rose from bed, my slippers brushing the cold floor. The kitchen light buzzed softly as I flicked it on. No one had set aside a plate for me. I hadn't been hungry earlier. I wasn't hungry now. But the emptiness asked to be filled. I opened the pantry and found a lonely tin of sardines in the back. Dusty, slightly dented. I used to pack this kind of thing for school lunches. Now I was opening one for dinner. Alone, at midnight. I sat at the table, the fork cold in my hand. Outside, the streetlight cast long shadows across the window pane. I took a bite. The salt stung a little. So did the silence. And without warning, a single tear slid down my cheek. Not loud, not heaving, not theatrical. Just, quiet. As if even my grief had learned not to make a fuss. I didn't wipe it away. There was no need, no one watching, no one to pretend for. When I finished, I rinsed the fork, dried it, and returned it exactly where it belonged. Then I walked to the closet. The maroon sweater was still there. Of course it was. I reached for it, hands steady now. Not with rage, not with sorrow, but with something final. I folded it carefully, just as I had imagined doing all those years ago, if I'd ever worn it to an office. Each sleeve lined just right, the brass buttons gleaming softly under the hallway light. I found an old piece of newspaper and wrapped it like a fragile gift. Then I tore a small scrap of paper from my notebook. And in simple, quiet handwriting, I wrote, "Enough." I slid the note beneath the last fold. Not for anyone to find. Just for me. Just so the silence would know it had finally been answered. In the days that followed, I spoke less, not out of spite and not because I was angry. Something had simply quieted inside me, like a drawer that had been gently closed after years of being left open. I no longer asked if they wanted tea. I didn't remind my husband about his pills or tell the children to bring a coat. They managed fine, of course. They always would. I watched them adjust, just slightly, to my stillness. No one commented, no one asked. Perhaps they were relieved not to be reminded, not to be watched over. Perhaps they didn't notice at all. There's something strange about disappearing in plain sight. You begin to see things more clearly from the edges. In the afternoons, when the house settled into its usual rhythm of distant footsteps and muffled screens, I opened the old tin box beneath my bed. Inside were letters I had written but never sent. Scraps of thoughts, journals with broken dates, little fragments of myself I had tucked away during moments when I didn't have the space, or the courage, to speak aloud. One letter, dated 15 years ago, read, "Sometimes I dream of driving somewhere with no address, just going until I remember who I was before everyone needed me." I don't remember writing it, but the ache in it felt familiar, like meeting an old version of myself and seeing the same tired eyes. There were photographs too. Me in my 20s, standing beside my mother, both of us holding spoons over the same pot of soup. Me with a book on my lap, legs curled under me like a girl still waiting for her own life to begin. I sat there on the bedroom floor, surrounded by versions of myself no one else knew, and something settled in my chest, something not bitter, but sharp and real. They didn't mean to hurt me. None of them did. They simply didn't see me. They had grown used to my presence the way you grow used to background music, comforting, steady, forgettable. I had trained them well, to rely on me, to lean without looking, to assume I would always be there, waiting, holding, preparing. And maybe I had trained myself too, to stay quiet, to be needed instead of known. That afternoon, I opened the newspaper-wrapped bundle again. The maroon sweater, still soft, still rich in color. It looked almost new, despite all the years it had waited. I didn't fold it back into the closet. I laid it gently on the kitchen table, where the morning sun had begun to stretch across the wood. The light touched it softly, turning the fabric warm, almost golden. For the first time in a very long time, I thought, this is beautiful, and I don't need a reason to see it that way. That morning, I rose before the sun. The house was still asleep, wrapped in its warm, habitual hush. I walked gently, not out of fear of waking anyone, but because the silence felt sacred, and I didn't want to disturb it. I didn't turn on the kettle, didn't lay out the bowls or prep the morning rice. For the first time in decades, I let the day begin without me. My hands moved with calm certainty. I had packed the night before, a change of clothes, a few worn paperbacks, a small jar of tea leaves. The maroon sweater was no longer just hanging. I wore it now, buttoned carefully, its warmth unfamiliar but comforting. I stood in the kitchen one last time and looked at the table. The same table I had wiped clean for years, the same spot where I had once placed bowls and bottles and endless gestures of care. And now I placed a single folded note. Gone to the sea for a few days. Don't call. I'm all right. Mom, I didn't sign it with love, not out of anger, but because this moment wasn't for them. It was for me. Outside, the dawn air was crisp and clean, the kind of quiet that carried no expectation. I walked to the end of the street with my small suitcase rolling behind me, its wheels ticking softly on the pavement, like the sound of time learning to move differently. The bus was nearly empty, a young man with headphones near the INV back, an older couple asleep against each other near the front. I sat by the window, pressing my fingertips to the glass, watching the city slowly drift past. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going somewhere for someone. I wasn't running errands, wasn't helping, wasn't needed, and I didn't feel guilty about it. There was no one beside me on the bus. No voice asking what we'd eat, no small hand tugging at my sleeve, no companion in the seat next to mine. And strangely, that was okay. I didn't feel forgotten. I didn't feel erased. I felt present. As the bus rolled toward the coast, my sweater warmed in the sunbeam filtering through the window. It no longer felt like a symbol of what never happened, but a gentle armor for what might still come. The sea was waiting, not with answers, but with space. And sometimes space is the first kind of freedom a woman ever learns to take without asking. The seaside air has a quiet rhythm. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't ask anything of you. It simply arrives, each wave, each breeze, softly like a visitor that never stays long but always returns. I rented a small room above a bakery in a sleepy coastal town, the kind of place where laundry flutters on balconies and the smell of sea salt clings to your hair even after you've gone indoors. The woman who owns the house, Mrs. Lum, didn't ask many questions. She showed me to my room, handed me the key, and said, "The market opens at 6. If you like flowers, the old man on the corner sells dahlias." I did like flowers. I hadn't realized how much, so I bought some. Dahlias in a chipped glass vase set gently on the windowsill, red, orange, yellow, like fire blooming slowly. They didn't serve a purpose. They didn't feed anyone, fix anything, or mean anything to anyone but me. And that was enough. Each morning, I walked barefoot along the shoreline, letting the cold waves touch just my ankles. I carried a small notebook in my sweater pocket, and when something stirred in me, a memory, a sentence, a longing, I wrote it down. No one was waiting for dinner. No one needed their shirt ironed or their medicine on time. At first, the emptiness felt too loud. Then it felt like space. And then it felt like mine. One afternoon, I sat in the park near the edge of the harbor watching a group of older women playing cards and arguing about mangoes. One of them turned to me and said, "You live alone?" I nodded. She laughed, not unkindly. "Good. At our age, if we don't start doing what we want, then when?" I smiled. A small one. But it felt as if something inside my chest opened. Not broken, not torn. Just open, like a window after a long winter. It wasn't that I had changed. It was that I had finally stepped out from behind all the names I had worn for so long. Wife, mother, auntie, caretaker, helper, listener. Now, when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone not waiting to be needed, not smaller than the room she stood in. Just here. That evening, I returned to my small room, opened my notebook, and wrote the truest sentence I've ever let myself say. My name is Ha. I used to be a mother. I used to be a wife. Now I am simply, me. No fanfare, no explanation, just a name and a beginning. I came home after a month, no dramatic return, no grand entrance, just me, stepping through the same front door with the same small suitcase, the same maroon sweater now softly worn at the elbows. But I was different. The house was exactly as I left it. Shoes by the doorway, the hum of the refrigerator, that slight creak in the floorboard near the stairs. They were surprised, of course. Not angry. Just uncertain. My husband stood blinking in the hallway, unsure if he should smile or ask where I'd been. He said, "You're home." And I simply nodded. My daughter-in-law appeared a few minutes later. She looked relieved and hesitant. She offered a soft, cautious smile, then asked, "Are you, all right, Mom?" I looked at her and felt no need to explain, no need to defend or recount or shrink. I nodded again, a slow, steady gesture that said, "Yes, I am finally." From that day on, things were not perfect, but they shifted, subtly, gently. They began to ask me questions, small ones at first. "Do you feel like coming with us? Would you like to choose the movie tonight? What kind of tea do you want this week?" Tiny acts of recognition. Not always, but more than before. And I began answering. Not automatically, not to please, but honestly. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes I don't know, let me think. And no one flinched when I said it. In the mornings, I sit out in the garden with my book. The maroon sweater wraps around me, not as a symbol of what I lost or never claimed, but simply because I like how it feels. And how it looks, deep red against the green. I don't wear it to make a point anymore. I wear it because it belongs to me. Like this time, like this version of myself, there's no need for a grand reinvention. No need to burn the past or erase the years. I was never truly lost. I was simply buried under the weight of everyone else's needs. Now I carry myself differently. Not louder, not sharper, just fuller. Sometimes the children still forget small things. Sometimes my name still blends into the background of their busy days. But now I know I don't have to vanish when that happens. I sit in my chair, book in hand, sweater warm, light falling across the grass like a quiet promise. And I think to myself, I did not disappear. I simply returned to being me. In a way no one else gets to shape.